So this video, we're going to set up a PBR material real quick. Then we're going to talk about converting OpenGL normal maps into DirectX normal maps or vice versa. And then move on to height maps and displacement maps. And then after that, we're going to play around with a little bit of material blending, simple material blending using a mask anyways. So let's just get started here first and go into Blender. Now we're going to do this in Blender 4.3 beta. It should be out by the time you watch this video, hopefully. And it's pretty good overall so far. But in the scene, just press A, X, delete everything, Shift A, create a mesh plane. All right, this plane, I'm going to go into edit mode, right click, subdivide, hit Shift R a few times so I can subdivide it. This is going to be for displacement later on, okay? Now, that's done. Hit tab, get back out of that, go to shading. All right, we're going to set up material on this. So grab the mesh, tilde key, view selected, get a better view of it. Create new. This is going to be the brick texture real quick. And we're going to set it up manually first, then we're going to use Node Wrangler, okay? So sometimes Node Wrangler doesn't get it right. It's good to know how to do these things manually, all right? Control spacebar, you can go full screen when you're hovering over a window if you didn't know that. In our case here, we're going to need some image textures. So Shift A, create texture, image texture. I'm going to need several nodes here. We'll hit Shift D, or several image textures anyways. Duplicate it out. You can grab them and hit G to move them, of course. And we're going to start opening things up. So let's get started with going to the textures folder that we're going to use, the bricks. You can view thumbnails if you want, or the list. A lot of the times these things have suffixes, and so it's like underscore ambient occlusion. This is what Node Wrangler add-on is going to require in order to hook these things up properly later on. So just keep that in mind. When you download textures from most websites, they now do this. It's not a big deal. Okay, so what we're looking at here is we're going to do the color first. Okay, so we got base color. Next up, we will do, we'll go back to the brick section and we will do ambient occlusion. All right. After that, followed by roughness. And then we can do the normal map. In our case, Blender uses an OpenGL normal map, right? So we'll do that one first. And over here will be the height map or displacement map. Might be named either or. In our case, it's displacement. And that's going to go and plug into the material output right there where it says displacement. We need a couple extra nodes for the displacement vector, displace. For the normal map, vector, normal map. Okay. We can start hooking these things up. We're going to start with the base color, plug it into base color. We'll skip ambient occlusion for now. We'll go over that in a sec. Roughness to roughness, normal to normal color, or color to color, and then normal map to normal. Control, right click, and drag. You can slash cut it. Okay. Normal to normal. There we go. This one will go into height actually. And that'll plug into displacement, which we'll do later as well. All right. So now we got the basic setup here, but pay attention to this little yellow node here, the little hookup. These are ones are gray. So usually these ones are non-color. And you can see here, if, in our case, the roughness, it's set to sRGB. Non-color would work out better for this, all right? If your textures look a little bit weird, it's a good odd chance you didn't change them. Basically, this turns it into linear color space so that it doesn't have gamma correction, and then as a result, it'll display properly, right? So just keep that in mind. And ambient occlusion and base color will combine together later, so it's not going to be, you don't need to change that one. This also needs to be non-color, like so, okay? So that's going to be like that. All right. Now everything should be hooked up, mostly correct. So control spacebar back out. We can look at it over here. We can see what's going on. It's okay looking, but it's kind of hard to tell what's actually going on sometimes in this view, because a lot of your scene lighting here, it's rather just kind of, it's not like real contrasted lighting. It's just kind of more of like an ambient lighting, right? So what we need to do is go to the render tab sometimes. And this is also good for kind of debugging your materials sometimes. Shift A, create light, point light. Just press G, move it out, get it somewhere like that. Hit Shift D, duplicate it over here. Just position it in the corners maybe. You can right click, adjust light power, crank them up a little bit if needed. Okay, and change 1 to some color. Doesn't really matter what color you choose. I'll do an amber, and I'll do a light blue like this. And it's still hard to tell kind of what's going on sometimes with like normal maps. So you might select the normal map section here, node, and press, we'll just bump it up to like 5. And so your normal map should be looking correct, right? Where like the blue side on the bottom side of the brick would be blue, and the other side would be yellow. If you had used the wrong normal map, what would happen is you would end up having it reversed. So like DirectX example. And it would look like this without setting it to non-color. Set it back to non-color. But yeah, they're reversed now, basically, right? See how that works? So this could happen to you. Sometimes you might, find a texture set you really like, but it's just the wrong normal map. You can convert it here in Blender, but you could do this in like Photoshop as well. In Blender, we're going to add a color RGB curves node. So color RGB curves, set the green channel like this, and then go ahead and flip it. That's going to invert the green channel of the texture. So if you're in Photoshop, you go to your channel section, green, you hit Control I, it inverts it, save it. You'll have converted it, right? And we just did the same thing. So that's awesome. We have that going. That's nice. Let's do the ambient occlusion now. And so ambient occlusion is not technically correct here inside of Blender. There's no ambient occlusion hookup for the principled BSDF shader. So we do color, mix color, drop it here. And so your base color will go into A, ambient occlusion into B, set it to multiply, and set it to 1. Now, when we look at the ambient occlusion here, that one, usually like it's pretty light usually. And then only in like little small cavities does it get some shadow kind of effects going like that. And so all the multiply does is it's going to darken the image where it's darker here. And the white would not really do anything. So when we go back, you can see if we didn't have this hooked up here at all, it would look like this. With it hooked up, it looks like this. Now, technically, this isn't correct for PBR materials. We more or less converted our base color into a diffuse texture, if you would. But it's one of the only things you can do here inside of Blender, really. So a lot of artists use it. It's not a big deal for the most part. Now, we have all that hooked up pretty well, okay? When we add displacement here, we're going to see an instant result that it's going to look like this, but not much else happens, all right? It just makes it rougher. So the trick here is press N, go to Options, and we're going to change displacement to displacement only. It's going to do a number like this. At first, it's not a very high resolution, and so we need to add more geometry to this, even though we already subdivided it. We're going to subdivide it more. So we're going to go to the modifier panel, generate subdivision, and we're going to bump up the viewport amount here. And you might want to change your render amount as well. And we'll see if we have this result. It's also very strong. Change the scale down smaller, 0.1 in this case. All right. You see our subdivision rounds corners. We have two options. We can try to boundary smooth, keep corners. That might work for you. Or you can change it to simple, perhaps. All right. And you can see now it's behaving a lot better than it was. But we still have a little bit of an issue here. It's not a big issue anyways. But when we look at a displacement map like this, right, or a height map, a lot of times the target is to set like a mid-gray height map. So that way, when you're displacing, it goes up and down from the surface level, right? If you're using a displacement map that's got kind of like a all-around black image, but it raises up, and you have like lighter areas, that's going to be a mid-level of 0, basically. It's only working upwards. When you make it a mid-gray, it works out in both directions. You want a mid-gray going out in both directions, all right? So this is how more or less mid-level works. And if it's at 0.5, it should be mid-gray. If it was black, it would be 0. And, then you would only be able to push up. If it was black, mid-gray can go in both directions. In our case, our displacement is not near mid-gray. It's on the higher end towards white, right? So what we're looking at is we're going to have to change our mid-level, right? Because it's too high. So we can go ahead and crank mid-level offset, basically. That's the best way of looking at it, is it's an offset more or less. And we could just kind of line that up to where we would ideally like it to be, all right? And so that works out just like that. Now we got a problem with this though, because we're using Eevee right now. In edit mode, hit Control or select Control, select. We're going to extrude that out. Press E, Z, bring it down. Press U, unwrap. And we're just going to do a conformal real quick. When we look at this, you'll notice that as soon as you create a seam or a new island, it's not even like you're marking seams. It's literally, you know, a new UV section, right? That is an island. So that's technically a seam. But when we do that, it doesn't stay together. Okay. Now this is going to be a problem inside of Eevee, but it's not a problem inside of Cycles. So let me go ahead and switch my system to render on GPU real quick. Go to Cycles, set it to GPU. All right. And you see when this does this, there's no problem here now. Okay. With Cycles, for whatever reason, the Eevee displacement does that. That doesn't mean it's not useful. It's just not working the same as Cycles right now. It can still be used on like terrains and things like that, where you have one big UV island, more or less. Very, very well anyways. So there's another little trick to this though. We'll go ahead and delete those for now. What if you wanted this to be geometry, right? Like you cannot convert this into geometry the way it's currently set up. Okay. You can't use this like that in that manner. So I'm going to control right click and cut that off. We're not going to use it. And we're going to switch back to Eevee as well. So we have a little bit more performance. Now, we can use the subdivision first and then follow it up with the subdivision, a deform displace. Okay. So you can use a displacement modifier. You can see it already pushed it way up there. We're going to click new. I'll give this a name. We'll just call it brick real quick. And this texture here, if we go to this texture section, you'll see that we have, well, brick, right? And it should already be kind of good to go, except you want to switch the image texture here to your displacement. If you load in a new one, don't forget to set it to color space non-color. Okay. Back on our modifier, we're still going to need to adjust this. So strength, you might want to bring it down like we did before. And it's the same process basically if you want to adjust the mid level. Okay. You could do that. And you want to make sure you're using UV usually, right? Not local necessarily. In our case, it's not going to really make too much of a difference, but that would be the proper setup for it for the most part. Now, if you do this correctly, this can be utilized potentially to create mesh for something like Unreal Engine 5 with Nanite, right? Using the Nanite system. You see I Shift D, hit X, and then hold Control while sliding it over. These should be seamless as it's set up right now anyways. All right. Now, in order to create modular pieces that are also seamless in this manner, it's a lot trickier. I'll save that for another video, but it's technically possible to use displacement and displacing like a more cubic type of wall setup, right? Not just a plane. The trick is though, you end up having to use vertex groups and displace it in a certain manner. And it gets a little bit complicated. It's not that much fun, to be honest. So, but it's possible. Just want to point that out. So that's the basic idea of setting up PBR materials. Like for with this setup anyways, you know, you can always like convert this to a mesh. If we look at the wireframe real quick, if we just do wireframes on, it's very dense. And if you want, you could try doing something later on like a decimate. So generate decimate modifier, maybe bring it down to like 0.2 and you'll get a lower triangle count here, but it's not going to be as demanding as having a higher triangle count basically. So even for nanite meshes, this still might be preferable in a lot of ways because it's lower triangle count overall and it tends to work out better for file sizes and whatnot, right? All right, so with that out of the way, that's how you set up something like that. Now, let's go ahead and go into material preview, hitting Z, go to material preview. We'll turn off those wireframes real quick. We're going to do something a lot more complicated and it's not guaranteed to go very smoothly here. So I'm going to create a plane, bring this out. I'm going to duplicate it. Okay, so we're going to do that. We're going to set up two materials here, but let's do this the fast way. Let's go to preferences, add-ons, and enable Node Wrangler. All right, Node Wrangler is awesome because with the naming conventions, this will work out just fine. Create one material. I call this like Rock 01 or something. We can create another material and call this like Rock 02. All right, so when we select, you can see it switches, right? All right, so it's a cool way to working with Blender is you just stay in the shader editor basically. Select the principal BSDF shader, hit Control-Shift-T. Okay. Once you've done that, you can go find a rock texture that you want to utilize. In my case, I'll use this one. And we're going to do the basics here, just color, normal GL, roughness, and displacement. Okay. We're going to go ahead and toss those in like this. And one of the things it does that I did not do is it adds a texture coordinate and mapping node as well. It's not required that you use these, but oftentimes you'll find them useful, that you have different types of inputs here. So you can see texture coordinate right there for input, and vector mapping is where you'll find those if you want to hook that up. They connect into the vector slots. And that's how you can control your UVs basically, and create tiling effects and things like that. Or do box mapping for your textures, which I'll save for another video as well. So here's the thing. We have a PBR material set up that quick, right? Very quick. And that's the way it should be. It's easier. We'll do the same one over here. Color. We don't need ambient occlusion in our case. We'll do displacement, normal GL, roughness. Boom. Just like that. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and create another plane. Actually, we'll duplicate this one, send it over here. And then we're going to duplicate the material. And we'll call this the blend material. All right, just so we know what we're doing here. It's a new material, so there's the old one still remains, basically. You see, rock 2, rock 1. Okay, so we know this is going to be rock 2, but we want to work with rock 1 as well. So we'll just copy this real quick. All of this right here, you can go ahead and copy it. Hit Control-C. Control-Space-Bar back out if you want. Go back to this one, hit Control-V. Press G to move it. We'll have two materials set up like this. Principled BSDF, principled BSDF. We got an output, and we have two displacements now. All right. Something like this. And we'll get this all going. It might be a little bit squirrely as I go through this, but we'll try our best. All right. So here we go. Let's do a Shift-A, create shader, mix shader. Drop it on there. We'll drop this one on here. We're going to go ahead and create a texture, image texture. We'll create new. And this is going to be a mask, okay? Now we're just doing one mask here to control two material blend, but you can set up like 3 material blend by using an RGB mask, okay? So that'd be like a mask in the red channel, green channel, blue channel, and it gets more complicated than that. You can use a lot of channels if you wanted to, possibly, or multiple RGB masks and whatnot. So you can, it's really kind of complicated to set up inside a Blender. It's much easier doing things like this in the game engine. Of course, what we do here in Blender doesn't transfer to the game engine either necessarily. We'd have to reconstruct this process over there more than likely. So you'd have to set up a shader over there, and you could use maybe the mask and the material or textures, but you'd have to set up your shaders over there. All right. The same thing happens with Decal Machine. Everybody asks about that when they're using decals. Decal Machine has a parallax occlusion shader, and it's much easier to set up parallax occlusion shaders inside of Unreal Engine. So it's much better to do it over there. But if you wanted to transfer Decal Machine to Unreal, what ends up happening is that you have to recreate the shader, basically. Okay. But with that out of the way, yes, it's possible to create POM in Blender, by the way. So with that out of the way, I'm going to click OK. We've created this mask. We're going to plug it into here. Okay. And that's all we're going to do for now. And this mask is also going to control the blend between these two here, displacements. This is going to be a little bit weird, but we're going to actually do a color blend on these as well. So mix color. All right. Here and here. And it's actually kind of simple because all we're going to do is plug that into there now. And we're going to use that same mask to drive our mix of these textures. Okay. So we're actually mixing the textures here as we're mixing the shaders here. It's more performant to mix the textures, generally speaking, but it's easier to do the shaders. So, I mean, that's a judgment call there. But you'll do a lot more work mixing all the shaders, obviously. Okay, so we got all this going, and it is applied to this material, or materials applied here to this area. So we can hit Control-Tab or Control-Tab and go into Texture Paint mode. In Texture Paint mode, what we want to do is we want to use a single material, and we're going to use our mask, okay? We're going to set it to black, set it to white right here. And so if we were to go ahead and press X, we can switch between them, and we can start to blend. You see? It doesn't look that great right now. There are ways of doing like height blends and things like that, but For now, we got this going. It's not too bad. We'll kind of run with it. It's set to bump only. Set it to displace, and you'll probably have it go crazy more than likely. Oh, we also have to subdivide it, right? So right click, subdivide, hit Shift R a few times, add the modifier, subdivision modifier. Simple, we'll bump up the local for now and render. Okay. And so this is where it gets fun. We're going to set the displacement amounts, the scales to 0.1. We got to go back and do all that. All right. But the mid-level becomes a little bit more interesting because now we got these two trying to blend with each other. You can see how that mid-level could really affect this. So, you know, we can kind of eyeball what's going on here a little bit, but it seems like this mid-level, we could pull it up maybe. Maybe the other one we pull down a little bit. Right, if we can. Yeah, so we can get a little bit more contrast between the two materials. That could be possible. So if you're clever about this, you don't necessarily need to height blend everything. But you can kind of blend these together to make them look really good anyways. Let's do a level 5 real quick. Yep. All right, so now when we're texture painting, we can hit F to change the size, Shift F to change this, and that's the opacity, or the strength. So we can really come in here and just start blending them together with low strength if we wanted to. You see how that works out? All right, we can use a grungy texture mask as well up here if we wanted to set that up to go ahead and make them blend a little bit differently, perhaps with some noise in it and stuff like that, right? Use it as an alpha, basically. Let's get something a little bit more dramatic going first. Also, I found that doing this in material or rendered preview, and it does tend to have some little hiccups with lighting sometimes. You have to get out of texture paint and mess around with it. All right, so this is rather interesting, but I think I'm not guaranteeing this one will work necessarily. Oh, nope, it's not going to work. I don't usually work inside of Blender this way, but it is a technique that you could utilize that I know a lot of people do implement. So there's definitely more advanced shader setups to do blending. And but I thought I could for sure. I guess we could turn on symmetry on X and Y. And if we go up to this edge, we will probably affect the other side, maybe. I was wondering if we could keep this seamless. It doesn't look like it. It might have just crashed even. It did not like that. So yeah, maybe not do that. You can make it seamless if you're careful by laying out tiles, but that's for another video. I'm not gonna do that in this one. You have to play around with that idea a lot. Anyways, yeah, we can blend this all day long, make some really interesting kind of setups here, compositions of the different materials. And because of the nodes, the way they're set up with the mapping node like this, if you wanted to, you can go to the scale section of it, click and drag down, and then drag left or right. And you can do things like this all day as well. You see it's only affecting one right now. So you could individually map these, by the way, by doing that. I forgot to copy. Oh no, they're separated right now. Yeah. Okay, cool. I thought they were using the same one, but they aren't. But yeah, you can affect each one individually. Right. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, that's the basic idea of material blending. It's very simple once you understand how to kind of get it started. Now you can imagine doing, more textures, more materials, using a colored image as a mask instead of a black and white one, right? And if you ever watch a video on it, it'll make a whole lot more sense now because this is like the simplified kind of setup of it, really. This is like a bare bones material blend. And yeah, it still gets a little sluggish sometimes, though, here in Blender. All right, so if we look at this with render preview and we get some lights over here, so we'll borrow these lights, Shift D, hold X, and we can see what's going on now. Okay. We can go back into texture paint even. And we can do some stuff like that. Let's make it a little bit more dramatic real quick, and then we'll call this video here because I think we've had enough fun learning all this, right? So let's go ahead and just change the mid-levels on one of these. You can get dramatically different looking effects on some of it, right? Because of the mid-levels. What about the other one? Push it down more. Yeah. So yeah, it's a pretty dramatic difference, I would say. Got like bigger rocks going now instead of just little minor details. And ultimately, it works out fairly well. You can push it within reason. Like, you can't get too crazy with it sometimes, but like the displacement, that is. But yeah, not too terrible, right? All right, anyways, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and all the other fun stuff. And I'll check you out in the next one, all right? Take care.